longer a rigid body. If it turns to dust, all the little particles in it are still rotating. It's just not rotating as a rigid body. So it does maintain the laws of angular momentum or conservation.
In other words, no heat generated by gasoline, airline fuel. No amount of heat could have done that to that tipping tower, right?
Well, this was nearly an hour later when the building went poof.
Okay, now this brings me to something that nobody talks about, and I'm stunned it's even a chapter in the book. It is the chapter on the hurricane that was just outside the edge of New York. Tell us about that hurricane, and why would it not have been reported on the weather report?
It was reported, but not so that anyone really remember it. It's just it was underreported. As you know, that weather stations, they drool and salivate over weather events, and they name it, impending disaster station. Come see us, come tune into our station, and they just milk it for all they can because they get viewership. So you would think anything, faintly coming towards, this could be imagined to be coming towards New York City, they would want to exploit it.
Well, what is the significance of that hurricane as far as you're concerned as it relates to this event?
Well, I'm collecting data. I'm looking at data, and what I notice is for 4 days, it's making a beeline straight towards New York City, and it's not talked about much. Almost not at all. It's not zero report, but it's very underreported. And the text messaging that comes from the weather updates, they say, well, you think it's going to turn around today on the first day? Well, it didn't. On the second day, well, it's going to turn around today. And it didn't. Next day, it's going to turn around today. It didn't. And the fourth day, it's going to turn around today. Well, it's a good thing it did, because it's right on the edge of Long Island. And there was a high pressure system moving eastward while the hurricane was moving westward. At some point they were going to hit, but how did they know exactly where it was going to hit? So they didn't need to warn anybody. When Hurricane Rita went towards Houston, they gave a voluntary evacuation before it became mandatory, to give some people a head start. Same with Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Bill. Those two were aimed towards New York. They give people, a running start. Now, Manhattan is at sea level, and it has a few million people there. How are you going to evacuate them in 1 hour if suddenly you realize you're wrong with predictions?
In reading that,
unless you are 100% sure it's not something that's going to ever hit Manhattan, or it's not going to stall out there, and you're not going to, have a big storm surge.
And the only way one could be assured that it was never going to hit is that it had to be engineered and controlled.
And somehow controlled. That leads to that conclusion.
It can only lead to that conclusion, and then also, I just wanted to absorb those fascinating facts. But when I got there, I thought, is this engineered hurricane somehow related to the events of 9/11?
Okay. After I got to that point, and actually how I discovered this, I wanted to see how far up that dust went, so I looked up some weather satellite images to see how far the dust could be seen. And then I went, what the heck is that? It's a hurricane. I didn't know about it. That's how I discovered it. And so then, realizing that, how were they so sure exactly when it would turn around, where it was about the closest, and I'm talking about the outer bands, not the eye of it. The outer bands were the closest to Manhattan approximately at 8 a.m. on 9/11.
How did you then discover the iron particles in the air, and what is the significance of that discovery? What does it reveal to you?
Back to the hurricane. So now this is something weird. Now what do hurricanes do? And I start thinking about hurricanes, thinking about how something's going around, it's getting spun around, and if it's moist air it's being spun around, you're going to have, it's sort of like a big Tesla coil. And then I started looking at the weather stations, and they report all around Manhattan. They reported thunder that day on 9/11. You know, birds know when a hurricane is coming.
Yes.
They feel the electrical system, the pressure changes, and they pack up and leave town. So
Well, the reference to the Tesla coil is bringing us closer and closer to something
yeah,
that I really want to get into, but I want to go.
right. But see how I don't want to just jump to the conclusion, because some people want to argue about opinions.
Yes, I know
And
exactly.
so I'm just you're saying that it is a fact that was underreported,
There's
and
no
it's a fact
question.
that you had dry thunder at these airports.
Okay, let's go back to chapter 16.5 and
Okay.
quote from Arthur Clarke, our 2001 genius writer, and it's called perceptual conformity. What is perceptual conformity?
Why don't you go ahead and read chapter 16.5? It's a nice intermission.
Okay,
That's what
you
it's
know
sort of
what?
there for.
Oh,
Yeah, I think the story is very good. Go ahead and read it.
that's your job, Dr. Wood. You know what? Let me do something here so that I can get to that. Let me just take a very, very brief break. I'm going to speak to Don, the engineer. Don, I'm going to take the very brief regular break so I can get to that particular chapter. Then, when I want to come back, Dr. Wood, we're going to get into the Tesla-Hutchison effect and questions about this energy weapon that you say has to somehow be involved with this, and you don't know quite what it is. I have a ton of questions about that. So
Uh,
you think about that, love.
Okay, do we have just a minute to? And I'll say what the perceptual conformity chapter is about.
Yeah, go
When
ahead.
the first jet aircraft were being test driven. There's a P-59, and the P-59 pilots and the P-39 pilots which were propeller planes. The two pilots would meet at the local watering hole, and after downing a few drinks, the P-59 pilots, the jet engine ones, were bragging about flying a propellerless airplane. And the other guys didn't believe it. So the next day, the P-59 pilot put on a gorilla costume, a derby hat, and a cigar in his mouth and went up flying. And then made sure that when the other one saw him up flying and pulled up next to him and waved. And then at the watering hole said, "Hey, did you see the escaped gorilla from the zoo? Up flying airplane." And the point being that people only see what they believe is possible.
Well, the point being also is you have wonderful quote, the quote from Arthur Clarke and others here when Mark Twain says, when you begin to think like the majority, you better rethink what you're thinking, which is so true. Don, I'm gonna take this break now because the stuff that's coming after the break is really mind-blowing. We'll be right back with Dr. Judy Wood and Where Did the Towers Go?
You're listening to BBS Radio. If it's not mainstream, it's on bbsradio.com.
Hi, I'm Richard Belzer, and this is the great BBS Radio.
Thank you for that smile upon your face, oh sunny.
Hi, this is John Barber. You may remember me as the co-host, producer, and creator of Real People, America's first reality show, or most recently as the writer-director of what's been called the definitive documentary on JFK's murder, The Last Word on the Assassination. Now I'm doing a show every other Monday from 5 to 6 Pacific Time on BBS. You'll hear provocative views, unreported news, and film reviews from me with outstanding guests and you. Join me on John Barber's World.
Those of you who have an ongoing interest in the JFK assassination might want to know about this. TV producer John Barber. He put together a dream team of JFK researchers, including Coast regular Jim Mars and world-class JFK writers Dick Russell and Joan Mellon. They all got together at UNLV in front of a live audience. They had a screening of Barber's terrific, and I'd say historic film based on interviews with prosecutor Jim Garrison of New Orleans. And then after the film was shown, the experts all talked about the latest JFK theories and evidence. It's now out on a DVD. Terrific stuff. I'm George Knapp, Coast to Coast AM.
Welcome back. I would like to thank... what was that? I'd like to thank George Knapp for that wonderful unsolicited review. And folks, if you happen to go to Amazon, you'll see dozens of unsolicited reviews about that really, really important documentary with new material from Jim Garrison about how he tracked down the guy that gave Jack Ruby the orders to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. And while you're up there, if you're looking for a smile or a thought or a homily or even something that'll make you angry, go to John Barber's Facebook page, Uncensored Volume 1. It's sort of like chicken soup for the funny bone. Anyway, thank you again. Thank George for that. And again, I'm thanking Dr. Wood for being here and most importantly for writing this book that's been called the most important book of the last 100 years. Dr. Wood, let's get to what you call the Tesla-Hutchison effect, since you brought up the business about what appeared to be like a Tesla coil in that hurricane. And what were your thoughts? Were you reluctant to go into the areas that you were going? Could you imagine that people could build such a thing or use such a thing? Take us through this.
Well, with Tesla, as I say, there are stories we read about in books. He doesn't live now, in the here and now. So they're just, as far as we know, the stories we read in books. They say, see what you see. Don't make assumptions. And I don't know how to go back in time. So, okay, that's fine. But then there's somebody who does live in the here and now who replicates Tesla's work. Oh, I got to go visit this person. And so I did. It was John Hutchison.
How did you hear about him and how did you find him?
Well, after I had cataloged all the different phenomena I had seen around Manhattan, one night I happened to stumble upon a blog, and by golly, somebody had reproduced every single one of these effects.
Oh, my.
And then, I contacted this person and sent him a photograph from the World Trade Center with this in front of WFC, that's World Financial Center, WFC1, where the double pane windows, one pane was missing but not the other, it had rounded holes, had a vehicle parked in the right place but upside down. I don't know if you remember that picture. I sent him that one. I said, "Does your neighborhood ever get to looking like this?"
That's funny.
And anyway, I went out to visit him, and I got to see things for myself, and I discovered some things about his samples that he didn't even know. And it was very instructive, and seeing is believing.
What was it you discovered that he didn't know? Because he must have been
about the magnetism, how that would be altered in his samples in the affected regions. Something that was not magnetic, where it is the affected area in the same, it was a solid cylinder, it was attracted to magnets.
I must tell you quite honestly, in the research that I did into John, and I found him very engaging. I found that his experiments and totally Buck Rogers fascinating. But I must tell you at the same time, I was still surprised he was alive, because I think a couple of times the Canadian government just broke into his labs and, like the FBI did when Tesla died, just confiscated everything. Where does John live, and what does he do now?
Do you remember that Helen Reddy song, Angie Baby?
Oh, yes.
There's a phrase from it that describes him well. It's so nice to be insane, no one asks you to explain. And I think Jesse Ventura interviewed John, and he said,